Look, I need to tell you something that's going to sound absolutely insane, but I'm going to tell you anyway because I can't keep carrying this alone anymore. My name is Sarah, I'm 28 years old, and 3 years ago, I was abducted by extraterrestrial beings. And before you click away thinking I'm just another crazy person on the internet, hear me out, because what I'm about to share with you isn't some vague dream or sleep paralysis episode. This was real. It was physical. And it changed everything I thought I knew about our place in the universe. I've always been what you'd call a skeptical person. I have a degree in biology, I work in medical research, and I've spent my entire adult life believing in facts, evidence, and the scientific method. If you had asked me 4 years ago what I thought about alien abduction stories, I would have given you all the standard explanations: sleep paralysis, false memories, psychological trauma manifesting in fantastical ways. I was that person who rolled their eyes at UFO documentaries. I was the one explaining away every strange light in the sky with perfectly rational explanations. Because that's what rational, educated people do, right? We explain the unexplainable until it becomes explainable. But here's the thing about being a skeptic. When something happens to you that defies every logical explanation you've ever held onto, it doesn't just shake your worldview, it obliterates it completely. It was October 15th, 2021. I remember the date exactly because it was 2 days after my birthday, and I was still feeling that weird post-birthday emptiness that always hits me. I was driving home from my lab at around 11:30 p.m. I'd been working late on a research project, which wasn't unusual for me. The roads were practically empty, just me, some scattered streetlights, and the usual late-night radio chatter. I was about 10 minutes from my apartment when I noticed this light in my rearview mirror. At first, I thought it was just another car with really bright headlights, you know. But as I kept driving, I realized the light wasn't behaving like car headlights should. It was too bright, too focused, and it seemed to be keeping perfect pace with me no matter how I adjusted my speed. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a helicopter. Maybe it was some kind of emergency vehicle, but there was no sound. No helicopter makes that little noise, and when I pulled over to let whatever it was pass me, it didn't pass. It just stopped, hovering about 50 feet above my car. That's when I knew I was in trouble. The light was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It wasn't harsh or blinding. It was almost warm, like sunlight, but completely silent. My car radio started making these weird static noises, and then my phone went dead. Not died, just went completely black like someone had flipped a switch. I tried to start my car to drive away, but the engine wouldn't turn over. The electrical systems were completely fried. I was sitting there in this warm, silent light, and I could feel this strange tingling sensation spreading through my entire body. It started in my fingertips and moved up my arms, like the feeling you get when your foot falls asleep, but not unpleasant, almost soothing. And then I saw them. 3 figures approached my car, and I want to be very clear about what I'm telling you here. These weren't hallucinations, these weren't shadow people or tricks of light. These were physical beings, walking toward me with clear, deliberate movements. They were tall, maybe 6.5 feet, but incredibly thin. Their skin had this pale, almost translucent quality, like you could see the light passing through them. Their heads were proportionally larger than ours, with those classic large eyes that you see in every depiction of greys. But their eyes weren't completely black. They had depth, intelligence. When they looked at me, I could feel them looking into me, not just at me. Here's where my memory gets strange, and I know how that sounds. But I remember trying to lock my car doors, a completely useless gesture in retrospect, and then feeling this overwhelming sense of calm wash over me. Not the kind of calm you choose, but the kind that's imposed on you from outside. One of them placed what I can only describe as a hand on my car window. Their fingers were long and delicate, and the moment they made contact, I felt this electric sensation shoot through the entire vehicle. The next thing I knew, I was outside my car, standing next to it, with no memory of opening the door or getting out. I tried to speak, to ask what they wanted, but I couldn't form words. It wasn't that my mouth wouldn't work. It was like the concept of verbal communication had become foreign to me. Instead, I heard a voice in my head, calm and emotionless. "Do not be afraid. We mean no harm." But I was afraid. I was terrified. And somehow, they knew that. The next thing I remember is being inside their craft. I don't remember walking toward it, being lifted into it, or transitioning from standing beside my car to lying on what felt like a smooth, warm surface. It's like someone edited out frames from my memory. The interior of their ship was nothing like what you see in movies. There were no flashing lights, no complicated control panels, no dramatic architecture. Everything was smooth, curved, and seemed to glow with that same warm light I'd seen outside. The walls, if you could call them walls, seemed to pulse gently, like they were alive. I was lying on something that felt like a cross between a medical examination table and the most comfortable bed I'd ever been on. I couldn't move, not because I was restrained, but because my body simply wouldn't respond to my mental commands. I could turn my head slightly, I could blink, I could breathe, but I couldn't sit up or move my arms and legs. There were more of them inside the craft, maybe 5 or 6 total. They moved around me with the efficiency of medical professionals, but their movements were so fluid they seemed to glide rather than walk. They communicated with each other, but not in any way I could understand. Sometimes I would hear something like whispers, sometimes just silence, but I could sense information passing between them. One of them, I started thinking of this one as the leader because the others seemed to defer to it, approached the table where I was lying. It held something in its hands that looked like a small metallic device about the size of a smartphone, but thinner and with no obvious buttons or screens. "We need to understand," the voice said in my head. Not the leader's voice, all of their voices sounded the same in my mind, neutral and calm. "Your species is at a critical junction. We are here to learn." What followed was the most thorough physical examination I've ever experienced. They used devices I couldn't identify to scan every inch of my body. Some of these tools made soft humming sounds, others were completely silent. I felt sensations, tingling, warmth, sometimes a slight pressure, but never pain. They took samples, hair, skin cells, blood, though they did it in a way that left no marks, no evidence. One device looked like a small wand that they passed over my arms and legs. Wherever it touched, I felt a slight pulling sensation, but when I looked at those areas later, there were no cuts, no bruises, nothing to indicate anything had been done. The strangest part was when they focused on my head. The leader placed both of its hands on either side of my temples, and suddenly I could see what they were seeing. Not through their eyes, but I could perceive their thoughts, their analysis of what they were finding. They were fascinated by human consciousness. I could sense their amazement at how chaotic and unpredictable our thought processes were compared to theirs, where their minds seemed to operate in clear logical streams. They saw our minds as these brilliant but chaotic storms of emotion, memory, and random association. "Your species thinks in ways we do not," the voice explained. "This makes you valuable." Through this mental connection, I began to understand why I was there, why any of us are taken. They're not here to harm us or to take over our planet. They're here because we're part of something larger, something that's been going on for thousands of years. According to what they showed me, human beings are the result of genetic manipulation by multiple extraterrestrial species over the course of our evolution. We're not just random animals that happen to develop intelligence. We're a hybrid species, carrying genetic material from several different alien civilizations. But here's the crucial part. We're not just some experiment they're observing from the outside. We're family, distant, primitive family, but family nonetheless. And right now, our species is approaching what they called a transition point. A moment where we either evolve into something greater or destroy ourselves in the process. They're here to monitor that transition, to understand it, and if necessary, to intervene to prevent us from destroying not just ourselves, but the unique genetic legacy we carry. "You are the children of stars," they told me, but children who have forgotten their heritage. But there's more to it than just monitoring. They showed me images, memories, I guess you could call them, of other humans who had been taken. Men and women from all over the world, all throughout history. Some, like me, were returned after brief examinations. Others became part of what they called the program. They're creating hybrids, human alien children who can survive in both worlds, who can serve as bridges between our species and theirs when the time comes for open contact. They showed me nurseries, rooms filled with children who looked almost human but with the large eyes and pale skin of their alien parentage. The women who participate in this program aren't chosen randomly. They're selected for specific genetic markers, psychological profiles, and something they called spiritual compatibility. Most of them don't remember their involvement. The memories are suppressed for their own psychological protection. I asked if I was going to be part of this program, and the answer I received was complex. "Your contribution has already been made," they told me, "but not in the way you might expect." The next thing I remember clearly is waking up in my car on the side of the road where I'd originally stopped. My engine was running, my radio was playing, and my phone showed a full battery. But 3 hours had passed. 3 hours that felt like 30 minutes. I drove home in a daze, trying to process what had happened. By the time I got to my apartment, I was already starting to doubt myself. Had I fallen asleep at the wheel? Had I had some kind of breakdown? The rational part of my brain was working overtime to explain away what I'd experienced. But then I found the mark. On my right shoulder blade, there was a small mark about the size of a dime. It wasn't a cut or a bruise, it was like a birthmark, but one that definitely hadn't been there before. It was perfectly circular, slightly raised, and had an almost metallic sheen to it. I had my doctor look at it a few days later, claiming I'd noticed this mole and wanted to make sure it wasn't cancerous. She was puzzled because it didn't look like any kind of natural skin formation she'd ever seen, but tests showed it was completely benign, just unusual. That mark is still there. It's how I know it really happened. The weeks following my abduction were the hardest of my life. I couldn't concentrate at work, couldn't sleep properly, and couldn't stop thinking about what had happened to me. I found myself constantly looking up at the sky, watching for lights that shouldn't be there. I tried to tell people. I started with my closest friend, someone I'd known since college. She listened politely, then gently suggested that maybe I'd been working too hard and should consider talking to someone. When I pressed the issue, she became uncomfortable and started avoiding my calls. I tried my parents next. My mom immediately started worrying about my mental health and wanted me to see a psychiatrist. My dad just looked sad, like I'd disappointed him somehow. Neither of them believed me, but both were clearly concerned about my state of mind. That's when I realized that being an abduction survivor isn't just about dealing with what happened to you. It's about dealing with the complete isolation that comes from having an experience that nobody believes, nobody understands, and nobody wants to talk about. I found support groups online, forums where people share similar experiences. Some of the stories were clearly fantasy or attention-seeking behavior, but others had details that perfectly matched what I had experienced, the same type of beings, the same procedures, the same sense of being chosen for something larger than themselves. Here's something I haven't told anyone before, not even in the online forums. The abduction wasn't a one-time event. They've been back. Not full abductions. I've never again lost hours of time or woken up somewhere I didn't remember going. But I've had contact. Dreams that were too vivid to be dreams. Moments of sudden, inexplicable knowledge about things I shouldn't know. Times when I found myself in my backyard at 2 a.m. with no memory of going outside, staring up at stars that seemed closer than they should be. 3 weeks after the initial abduction, I woke up from what I thought was a dream with a phone number written on a piece of paper beside my bed, in my own handwriting, but I had no memory of writing it. When I called the number, it was a research facility in New Mexico that studies atmospheric phenomena. The person who answered asked if I was calling about the anomalous light events, and seemed surprised when I said I didn't know what they were talking about. 2 months later, I found myself taking a different route to work for no reason I could explain. That route took me past a small park where I saw a woman sitting on a bench crying. Something compelled me to stop and talk to her. It turned out she'd had an experience similar to mine and had been struggling with the isolation and disbelief. We talked for hours, and she later told me that our conversation probably saved her life. I'm starting to think they didn't just examine me that night. I think they changed me, gave me some kind of ability to find other people who've had similar experiences. Either that, or they're still guiding me in ways I don't fully understand. Based on my continuing contact and the information I've gathered from other experiencers, I've started to piece together what I think is happening here. The aliens aren't just randomly abducting people for scientific curiosity, they're preparing us for something. Climate change, political instability, technological advancement without wisdom. Our species is heading towards several potential extinction events simultaneously, but we're also on the verge of becoming something more than we've ever been. We're developing technology that could take us to the stars. We're beginning to understand consciousness and quantum physics in ways that bridge the gap between science and what we used to call supernatural. The aliens have been through this transition themselves, probably multiple times with multiple species across the galaxy. They know the dangers, and they know the potential. They're here to make sure we don't destroy ourselves before we reach that potential. The abduction experiences, The hybrid program, the gradual disclosure of UFO information by governments around the world, it's all part of a slow introduction to prepare us for official contact. They can't just land on the White House lawn because the shock would cause more harm than good. Instead, they're gradually expanding our consciousness one person at a time. Every person who's had contact faces the same choice I'm facing right now. Do you keep quiet to protect yourself from ridicule and disbelief? Or do you speak out knowing that your credibility, your relationships, and your entire life might be permanently changed? I've chosen to speak out because I think we're running out of time. The division in our society, the environmental crises, the potential for nuclear conflict, all of these problems require us to evolve beyond our current limitations. And I believe that evolution is only possible if we accept that we're not alone in the universe. The beings who took me aren't our enemies. They're not our saviors either. They're our teachers trying to guide us through the most dangerous phase of our species' development. But they can only do so much. The rest is up to us. I know that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and I know how this all sounds. But I'm not asking you to take my word for it. I'm asking you to look at the evidence that's already out there. The mark on my shoulder isn't the only physical evidence I have. After my abduction, I started having unusual dreams about mathematical concepts I'd never studied. I'm a biologist, not a mathematician or physicist, but I found myself understanding complex equations related to quantum mechanics and dimensional theory. I wrote these equations down and showed them to a physics professor at the local university. He was stunned because they represented solutions to problems that current science is still working on. When he asked where I'd learned these concepts, I couldn't give him a satisfactory answer. I also have photographs. Not of the aliens or their craft. I wasn't allowed to keep my phone during the abduction, but photographs of unusual marks that appear on my body periodically. Small geometric patterns that show up for a few days and then fade away. Always in places I couldn't have made myself. Most compelling to me are the medical changes. After my abduction, I went for my annual physical. My doctor found several anomalies that hadn't been there before. My cellular regeneration rate had increased significantly. Basically, I was aging more slowly. My immune system had become remarkably efficient, and brain scans showed new neural pathways that hadn't existed before. When I asked my doctor to explain these changes, she couldn't. Sometimes the human body just surprises us, she said, but I know the real explanation. I'm sharing my story, not because I want attention or sympathy, but because I believe it's important for people to understand what's happening. We're not alone in the universe. And we never have been. The beings who are visiting us have been part of our development as a species for thousands of years, and they're still here because we're approaching a critical moment in our evolution. Some people will dismiss what I'm saying as delusion or fantasy. That's okay. I expected that. But for those of you who are listening, really listening, I want you to know that contact is possible. If you're open to it, if you're psychologically and spiritually prepared for it, they might reach out to you too. And if they do, don't be afraid. Yes, it's overwhelming. Yes, it will change your life completely, but it's not something that's being done to you. It's something that's being offered to you. A chance to be part of something larger than yourself, larger than our species, larger than our planet. The choice to accept that offer is entirely yours. Based on what I learned during my abduction and through subsequent contact, we're about 5 to 10 years away from some form of official disclosure. It won't be a dramatic revelation. It will be a gradual process of acknowledgement and preparation. Government agencies around the world are slowly releasing information about unidentified aerial phenomena. Scientists are discovering potentially habitable planets at an increasing rate. Our technology is advancing to the point where interstellar communication and even travel are becoming theoretically possible. All of this is connected. We're being prepared for membership in what they call the galactic community, a network of intelligent species that spans our galaxy and beyond. But membership isn't guaranteed. We have to prove that we're ready for that responsibility. That's why individual contact experiences like mine are so important. We're not just random victims of alien curiosity. We're ambassadors, bridges between their world and ours. We're being given information and abilities that we're meant to share, to help prepare our species for what's coming. I know how difficult this is to accept. Trust me, nobody wanted to believe it less than I did. I had a good life, a successful career, a rational worldview that made sense to me. Accepting the reality of my abduction meant giving up all of that certainty and stepping into a much larger, much more complex universe. But here's what I've learned. The universe is far more amazing than we ever imagined. We're not just random accidents on a small planet orbiting an ordinary star. We're part of a vast, intelligent network of consciousness that spans the cosmos, and we're being invited to join that network as full participants. The cost of that invitation is our illusion of being alone and separate. The benefit is becoming who we were always meant to be. If you've had experiences you can't explain, if you've seen things in the sky that shouldn't be there, if you've had dreams or visions that felt more real than reality, pay attention to them. You might be receiving the same invitation I received, and if you're not ready for that yet, that's okay too. Not everyone is meant to be a direct contact case, but everyone can prepare for what's coming by opening their minds to possibilities beyond our current understanding of reality. We're living in the most extraordinary time in human history. We're on the verge of becoming something more than we've ever been, and we're not going through that transformation alone. The question isn't whether contact is real. The question is whether we're ready to accept the responsibility that comes with knowing we're not alone in the universe.